Hey, Saturday class. I just wanted to do some updates on this assignment that is quickly approaching deadlines. And as usual on these assignment sheets, I've got all the deadlines and everything hyperlinked for you in the assignment sheet. This key resources, I always have these at the very bottom. Make sure that you've looked at this. This is the checklist on the source citation procedure. And it's aligned with what we did for the first speech, the speech that was the informative speech. And you just want to make sure, I just want to call your attention, you just want to make sure that you have all of these elements whenever you cite the source. And then there's some great examples on different ways that students have approached citing their sources in the past. The other thing I wanted to call your attention to is the Monroe Motivated Sequence template. And I uploaded a video earlier this week on this template, and make sure that you've watched that video because it talks about all the different elements you're going to need for your outline. And then there's also here's an example of the one where they have the credibility statement embedded. Make sure that you're labeling each of these steps. That's a common oversight whenever I look at these outlines. So you literally want to label statement, explanation, etc. So the other thing I wanted to call your attention to is what the different steps that I've outlined for you on this assignment. So last week we completed step 1, which was, let's see, right here. And each class does it a little bit differently depending upon what the class decides that they want to do. So the first thing that you should do is part 1. Well, each class, they decide on the topic differently, and I'm about to get to that. The first thing your team should have done, and if you haven't done it yet, you want to create a summative evaluation. Basically, these are the ground rules for your group. This is the rubric on how y'all are going to grade each other's team building skills. And these are some samples of criteria. And you want to create a grid where each student's name is on the grid, the dates of the class, these criteria, and the point values. And make sure that you have the like if it's, 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%, or however you want to break it down. The summative evaluation, I've even created a rubric here for you where you want to kind of take a look at this. And the summative evaluation, the rubric itself that you create is going to go into your team packet. As an individual, you're going to fill out that sheet and send it with your individual packet. And the rationale is we don't want other students to know how you graded them. In most instances, people give each other 100, but every once in a while there's someone who's not engaged, and I just want to protect the privacy of your colleagues. So each class does it differently. Some of my classes use a Padlet. Some of them use Google Documents. We had our strategy here for this class. And so part 3. In part 3, so just make sure you're just following these different parts. So make sure that you guys have an extensive conversation about what your ordinary observer, your personal opinion is on the topic. And you've had that conversation as a team. Once you've had that discussion, you're going to move into part 4, which is where each individual in the team is going to write 7 sentences of their ordinary observer or your personal opinion on the topic. And that should be in your team Google document. Now, once we've established what our personal opinion is on the topic, we're going to establish now a transition to strategic thinking. And that's what this 3 pairs model that I've developed is. In other words, we understand what our personal opinion is, but now let's go ahead and as a team in our Google document, go, okay, what are the structural and attitudinal barriers to this problem? In other words, what are the laws or the ordinances? If it's a municipal situation, what are court cases, whether it's federal or state court, structural barriers to the solution to your problem? And it could be attitudinal. Sometimes people know that it's a problem, but they kind of have a lukewarm opinion about it. Other times it's not a problem to them. Like in San Marcos, it's not a developer doesn't think it's a problem if they're going to build a high rise in my neighborhood. To me, it's a big problem. It destroys historical housing. It has impacts on flooding. It increases gentrification problems, which increase our property taxes. But to the developer, it's not a problem at all. It's a it's puppies and rainbows for him. Sometimes you have people who don't even know that it's a problem. So when I fought the smart meters or these digital meters that they put on your house, most people didn't even know it was a problem. It was a problem for me personally because I'm sensitive and I could feel the electricity from the smart meter on my house burning through my hands. Other people, a smart meter is a problem because it's a privacy issue. That wasn't my problem. My problem is I'm getting headaches. I feel energy going through my hands. And some people are hypersensitive to what they call dirty electricity. So I had to actually raise awareness in San Marcos with elected officials, city staff, and the citizens that it was a problem. In some instances, people are so overwhelmed by the problem, they don't even know what to do. So on your Google document, you're just going to literally copy and paste this and then fill in what's relevant to your public policy topic that you've picked. Then we've got short-term, long-term. Short-term, think about when COVID first came out, right? All of a sudden we're like, there's a worldwide pandemic. It was like a short-term problem and with immediate impacts. It was a sudden crisis. Other times it's been going on. There might be a specific policy problem that's been going on for a long time. So you want to think about the long-term and short-term effects, but you also want to think about it in terms of your solution. So when you're crafting your speeches, your persuasive speeches, is this a quick fix or is this a long-term systemic change? So for me with the smart meters, it was a quick fix. It took me 2 years, but it's a quick fix solution because I created this smart meter opt-out program where if you don't want a smart meter on your house, you fill out a form. San Marcos made me pay $100. Austin and California, you pay, I think they made me pay $100 and you paid $50 in other states. Maybe it was $25 and $50, but at any rate, they come out, they take off the smart meter and they put on the analog meter. Other times it may be more of a long-term systemic change that you're needing to make. So for example, if we're talking about a situation where there's an ice storm coming, we want to make sure if there's people who need immediate shelter, that is a quick fix. Or we may create a program where we have job training, a closed closet, maybe we create tiny homes, and now that's a systemic change to providing housing for people. Or even if we're looking at affordable housing, right? Affordable housing, there may be developments that are built that are more affordable for working Americans. Then the third pair of the three pairs is quantitative versus qualitative. In other words, can you measure the data? Are there specific dollar amounts that show your problem, or has it been going on for a long time? Maybe there's a specific number of people that are impacted by your problem. But sometimes we can't measure a problem. Sometimes it's our right to privacy or our liberty. And it's very difficult to pull out a tape measure or a scale to provide some sort of tangible measurement. And like, for example, with the sidewalk program, a good friend of mine who's a developer said, hey, you should focus on the tree with that sidewalk. Don't worry about historical preservation. Don't worry about the flooding. Only focus on that tree, which is intangible, right? It's a tree. Now, yes, I can put a dollar amount to my heritage live oaks, and they're worth a lot of money, quite frankly. Or, so that would be measurable. Or I could say, listen, once you destroy the critical root zones of this heritage live oak, there's no going back. And I made the mistake of trying to talk about all these other issues with the problem with the sidewalk, and I really should have focused on the tree. Now, the long-term solution of that sidewalk program, I did implement systemic change. Once they put that sidewalk on my heritage, in front of my heritage, they dug up the critical root zones of my heritage live oak, and they've created flooding on my block, quite frankly, for the people at the end of the street who wanted the sidewalk. And then it's also destroyed the look of this historic block. They literally had to shut down the sidewalk program for a year and reevaluate it, because in some of these houses, the sidewalk is right by your front door. So I wanted rubrics of distance between a sidewalk and someone's front door. They still haven't fixed my issue with you putting a sidewalk down one side of the street. That puts all the traffic out in front of my house. And quite frankly, my block is so small, they just all walk down the middle of the street. So if you've seen, I've talked about this in class, the sidewalk program. So this is what you're going to do with your Google document, is you're going to talk about, that way it helps you understand where your speech fits into this overarching conversation you're having about your public policy. And so I created a rubric for your Google document of how I'm going to look at that. And then I just wanted to remind you guys that the last thing you're going to do is you're going to perform your panel discussion. I've got the dates at the top of the assignment sheet. And you're going to turn in 2 packets. You're going to have your team packet, and I've even hyperlinked the rubrics. I'm not going to go over the rubrics right now in this video. I just want to make this a short kind of update of what you should be working on Saturday. And then you're going to have your individual packet just like your first presentation. And then once again, there's rubrics located, hyperlinked. So if you just click on this, boom, I've got the rubric for it. So I just want to make sure that you take a look at the deadlines for this Saturday class. And this video will hold true for other classes in the future. This is a once-a-week class, so just make sure that you understand your full sentence outline is due on Saturday. And the grade begins with a 70 if you don't have that full sentence outline. And then we will have our presentations on these 2 days here, the 24th and the 25th. So recap, when you come to class on Saturday, you guys are going to want to open up the staging of the assignment, which begins on page 8. And make sure that your team has created the summative evaluation. And then you want to make sure that, and there's the rubric, and then you want to make sure you've discussed the problem. And then you want to make sure that, because you guys have already picked the topic, right? So that one's already done. Then you want to make sure that you've introduced yourself and your personal opinion on the topic. And then you guys want to make sure that you've done the ordinary observer little paragraph that you're going to write up with 7 sentences. And each individual should be in that Google document writing up your ordinary observer, your personal opinions on the topic. Once you've done that, then you're going to go to part 5, which is the strategic thinking model, and go through each of these 3 pairs and type up your comments. And that will allow you to make adjustments to your particular speech. In my Monday, Wednesday class, they've created this and then they're kind of refining their speech, but we're only meeting once a day. So you should come with a speech ready to rock and roll, and then see if there's some holes in your team's perspective on the topic that you may want to add or cover more robustly in your speech. So I just want to make sure that everybody watches this video so you know what's coming down the pike when we show up on Saturday class. Thanks for watching my video.